It wasn't a movie scene, but every moment felt cinematic. Late one cold evening, a man walked quietly through the empty parking lot of St. Mary's Children's Hospital. No reporters followed him. No flashlights chased him. No cheers, no applause. Only the sound of his footsteps echoing in the night. He wore a simple gray hoodie, jeans slightly worn, and a baseball cap pulled low enough to hide his face. To most people passing by, he was just another visitor. But to the world, he was Keanu Reeves. Inside, the hospital was still. Dim lights glowed in the hallway, the kind that make you whisper even when you're alone. A nurse, exhausted from her double shift, lifted her head as the man approached. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Mr. Reeves?" she whispered, half shocked, half unsure. Keanu smiled faintly, that calm, gentle smile everyone knew, and softly said, "Please, no cameras tonight, no press. I just want to see someone." The nurse nodded silently. Something about his tone, the weight behind his calmness, told her this visit wasn't for attention. He wasn't here for headlines. He was here for a reason that went beyond fame. As Keanu followed her down the quiet hallway, he passed rooms filled with machines beeping softly, parents sleeping in chairs, and tiny figures wrapped in blankets. Every few steps, his eyes lingered, pain and empathy mixing in silence. Finally, they stopped outside a door. A small sign read, "Ethan, age 9. The nurse hesitated, then whispered, "He's been waiting. He thinks you're his hero." Keanu took a slow breath. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle. Then, in the softest voice, he said, "Let's make sure he knows he's the real hero tonight." He pushed the door open gently. Inside, the light was dim. Posters of John Wick covered the wall, and a little boy lay in bed holding a toy gun and a stuffed dog. The boy turned his head weakly toward the door. His eyes widened, mouth falling open in shock. Keanu stepped forward with a small smile. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I heard there's a warrior in here stronger than John Wick." The boy's face lit up. The machines kept beeping. The nurse quietly stepped back, and in that moment, the world outside didn't matter. Music swelled slightly. Because tonight, kindness didn't need cameras. It just needed heart. The little boy's name was Ethan, 9 years old, brave, curious, and far too wise for his age. Around his hospital bed hung drawings taped on the walls, crayons and sketches of John Wick. In every picture, the hero stood tall beside a tiny stick figure boy wearing a cape. At the bottom of each drawing, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, "Don't give up." Ethan had been fighting leukemia for almost 2 years. Through endless treatments, pain, and sleepless nights, he'd watched every Keanu Reeves movie he could find. To him, Keanu wasn't just an actor. He was proof that even in darkness, someone could fight, stand, and rise again. When doctors told his parents that recovery was uncertain, Ethan made a wish. Not for toys, not for a trip. He simply said, "I just want to meet John Wick." His mother smiled sadly. "How about Keanu Reeves instead?" Ethan had laughed softly. "They're the same hero, Mom." Weeks passed. Hope faded. The hospital staff gently avoided the topic. Visits from big celebrities rarely happened without cameras, without contracts, without attention. But on this quiet night, that hope walked through the door. Keanu stepped closer to the bed, lowering his voice, his smile calm yet heavy with emotion. "Hey, buddy. I heard you're the toughest fighter in this hospital." Ethan giggled weakly. "I'm trying to be," he whispered, his voice small but full of pride. Keanu sat down beside him, his large frame almost too big for the little hospital chair. "You know," he said gently, "when I play John Wick, I have to look strong. But you, Ethan, you actually are strong." The boy's eyes gleamed. "Nah, I just keep fighting 'cause John Wick never gives up." Keanu chuckled softly. "You know what? That's exactly what heroes do." For the next hour, time seemed to stop. They talked about movies, favorite scenes, and how Ethan had once dressed up as John Wick for Halloween. Black suit, fake beard, toy gun, everything. Keanu laughed with him, acted out fight moves, and even pretended to lose. At one point, Ethan pointed at his drawings and said proudly, "I made those for you." Keanu looked at the walls, his eyes softening. He walked closer, tracing his fingers over one drawing, John Wick standing beside the boy with the cape. he whispered almost to himself. Looks like he already has a sidekick. Ethan smiled. Do you think I could be in your next movie? Keanu turned back, kneeling beside the bed so their eyes were level. I think you already are, he said quietly. You're in the heart of every story I tell. Music swells slightly. Light pause. The nurse watched from the doorway, tears welling up. This wasn't a celebrity visit. This was a man meeting a soul braver than his own. And as the clock crept past midnight, one thought lingered in Keanu's mind. How can someone so small carry so much strength? Soft fade out. Narrator lowers voice, but neither of them knew. The night was far from over. Because before Keanu left that room, the little warrior would make one final request. A promise that would stay with him. Forever. The rain outside tapped softly against the glass, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Inside Ethan's room, time felt still. Fragile. Like the moment could shatter if anyone breathed too loudly. Keanu sat by the boy's bedside, elbows resting on his knees, eyes full of quiet warmth. He wasn't the world-famous actor right now. He wasn't the action hero. He was just a man, talking to a child who reminded him why kindness still mattered. Ethan clutched his stuffed dog, its fur worn from too many nights of holding on. He looked up shyly. Mr. Reeves, you really didn't have to come. You're busy saving the world. Keanu smiled gently. Nah, he said, the world can wait. Tonight you're the mission. Music softens, a pause, breath of emotion. They laughed together. Ethan showed him his drawings. One where John Wick was fighting monsters, another where he was helping a lost dog find home. Keanu studied them with deep admiration. These are beautiful, he said. You've got a gift, Ethan shrugged. It's what I do when I'm tired of needles. I draw something brave, so I don't feel scared. That line pierced Keanu's heart. He looked at the boy, frail, pale, yet glowing with something unbreakable. How can a child be this brave? He thought. For the next few hours, the room was filled with laughter, stories, and small acts of pure connection. Keanu taught Ethan how to mimic a movie punch. Slow motion, dramatic, but never painful. Ethan giggled every time Keanu pretended to lose, falling back dramatically and saying, Okay, you win, little warrior. The nurse peeked through the door, whispering to another staff member. This was supposed to be a 10-minute visit. It's been 3 hours. But Keanu didn't seem to notice the time. He didn't check his phone. He didn't glance at the clock. Every second belonged to Ethan. At one point, Ethan asked quietly, Why didn't you bring cameras? Most people do when they visit us. Keanu looked down for a moment before answering, his voice low and sincere. Because moments like these don't belong to cameras. They belong to hearts. Ethan smiled. That kind of smile only a child fighting pain can give, small but full of peace. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He opened to a blank page and handed it to Ethan. How about this? He said. You draw me something tonight, and I'll keep it with me wherever I go. Ethan's eyes widened. Really? Promise. Keanu nodded. Ethan took a pencil, hand trembling slightly, and began to draw. It wasn't perfect, just 2 figures holding hands under a night sky, a small dog beside them. At the top he wrote, Keep fighting always. Keanu watched silently. When Ethan finished, he tore the page carefully and handed it to Keanu like it was made of glass. Keanu folded it gently, slipped it into his jacket pocket and whispered, I'll keep it safe. Soft instrumental swells, emotional rise. As the night deepened, the nurses dimmed the lights and the hospital grew quiet again. Keanu stood up, about to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped him. Mr. Reeves? Keanu turned back, smiling softly. Yeah, buddy? Ethan whispered, Can you promise me something before you go? The actor froze for a moment. The weight in the boy's tone made his chest tighten. He stepped closer, nodded gently, and said, Anything. Music fades low. Narration slows. And in that fragile silence, the little warrior made a request that would stay in Keanu's heart forever. Screen fades to black. Transition to part 4. The promise and the goodbye. The night had grown deeper. The city outside had fallen asleep, but in that small room, something timeless was happening. Keanu sat beside Ethan, who looked weaker now, his eyelids heavy. The boy's voice trembled as he spoke. Mr. Reeves, when you fight in your movies, You never give up, right? Keanu smiled softly, shaking his head. Never. Not until it's over. Ethan looked down at his small hands, the IV line taped to his wrist. I like that, he said, because sometimes I get tired. But then I think, maybe heroes don't always fight with fists. Maybe they fight by staying kind. Those words, so innocent, so profound, hit Keanu harder than any bullet ever could. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. You're right, he whispered. That's the strongest kind of fight. Soft piano note holds, gentle. Pause. Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, Can I tell you a secret? Keanu leaned closer. Of course. Ethan smiled faintly. When I watch your movies, I imagine you're fighting for me. Like, every bad guy you take down, you're helping me stay a little longer. The room went silent. Keanu looked away for a moment, blinking fast, his eyes glistening under the dim hospital light. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. I am, he finally said. Every time. Music deepens, emotional swell builds. Ethan giggled softly, but his laughter faded into a whisper. Can you promise me something? Keanu nodded, barely breathing. Anything. Ethan reached out, his small hand finding Keanu's. When I'm not here anymore, I promise you'll still visit kids like me. Not because of cameras. Just because we need people like you to remind us that kindness is real. The actor's breath caught in his throat. He squeezed Ethan's hand gently, his voice breaking. I promise, Ethan. I promise. Soft violin enters. Emotional melody rises. For a long while, neither spoke. Keanu just sat there, holding that tiny hand that had fought so many battles. The boy's breathing slowed, his eyes fluttered shut, not in fear, but in peace. The nurse quietly peeked in, ready to remind Keanu visiting hours were over. But when she saw them, the star and the child, hand in hand under the pale hospital light, she turned away silently, tears in her eyes. Keanu whispered softly, You're a brave kid, Ethan. The bravest I've ever met. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, his words barely audible. Then don't be sad, Mr. Reeves. Heroes don't cry. Keanu bit his lip, unable to reply. He leaned forward and brushed Ethan's hair gently. Heroes cry too, he whispered. They just don't let the world see it. Music swells to emotional peak. Long pause. Minutes later, Keanu quietly stood up. He placed Ethan's drawing, the one that said, Keep fighting always, Emo, close to the boy's heart. Then he walked to the door, stopped for a second, and looked back one last time. The rain outside had stopped. Moonlight slipped through the window and landed softly across Ethan's face. Peaceful, glowing, almost angelic. Keanu whispered, Good night, little warrior. He stepped out of the room slowly. In the hallway, the weight of silence crushed him. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, tears slipping down his face. Silent, real, uncontrollable. Music fades into stillness, only the sound of slow footsteps echoing down the corridor. Narrator, soft, fading. That night, Keanu Reeves didn't leave as a celebrity. He left as a man who had witnessed the purest form of courage, from a child who fought his battles without ever drawing a sword. And as he stepped out into the cold air, he placed his hand on his jacket, where Ethan's drawing still rested. He whispered to himself, I'll keep my promise. Screen fades to black. Caption appears. Part 5. The Promise Lives On. Weeks passed. The world kept moving, as it always does, unaware of the promises made in quiet hospital rooms. But for Keanu Reeves, time hadn't healed. It had only deepened the silence inside him. Every night he would unfold that small drawing, two figures holding hands under a starry sky, and stare at the words scrawled in shaky handwriting. Keep fighting. Always. He kept it with him on movie sets, on flights, even during interviews, hidden in the pocket of his worn leather jacket. And though the world praised his movies, his heart stayed somewhere else. In that hospital room, with a little boy who believed heroes never give up, soft guitar joins the piano, tone becomes hopeful. Months later, one evening after a film shoot in New York, Keanu quietly told his assistant, "No press tonight. No schedule. I just need some time alone." He didn't go home. He took a cab to a children's hospital on the other side of the city. No cameras. No announcement. Just a man keeping a promise. When he entered, the nurse at the desk looked up, surprised. "Mr. Reeves? Are you here for a visit?" He smiled gently. "I'm here for the kids, if that's okay." And so for the next several hours he walked room to room, not as Keanu Reeves, the actor, but as a friend. He read stories, drew silly sketches, made balloon swords, and listened to every child who wanted to talk. He laughed when they laughed. He sat in silence when they couldn't. There were no photos, no news articles, just quiet moments of kindness, invisible to the world but seen by every heart in those rooms. Soft violin hums. Emotional buildup begins. In one room, a little girl named Mia asked him shyly, "Mr. Reeves, is it true you met Ethan?" The name hit him like a whisper from the past. He smiled softly, kneeling beside her bed. "Yes, I did. He was my little warrior." She smiled back, weak but bright. "He told us about you before he went to sleep." Keanu's eyes glistened. "He told you?" She nodded. "He said you'd come one day, to make sure we keep fighting too." Keanu swallowed hard. That single sentence was heavier than any applause he had ever received. Music swells gently. Hopeful tone builds. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out Ethan's drawing, the edges now worn and folded. He showed it to Mia. "Do you see this? He made this for me. And he asked me to keep fighting, just like he did." Mia's eyes lit up as she touched the paper gently. "He was right. You kept your promise." Keanu smiled through the tears. "Not just me," he said softly. "We both did." From that day onward, visiting children's hospitals became his quiet ritual. Between every movie, every trip, every red carpet, he'd vanish for a few hours or days, showing up unannounced wherever he was needed. He'd sit with sick kids, bring them books, listen to their stories, or just hold their hand. No publicity, no social media posts, only the faint sound of laughter echoing down white hospital corridors, laughter that healed more than medicine ever could. Soft piano re-enters. Blending with strings, the emotional warmth fills scene. One day, a nurse from Ethan's old hospital found him sitting in the garden outside. She said gently, "Do you know, Mr. Reeves, that after you left, Ethan's story spread through every ward? Kids started calling themselves little warriors. You gave them something to believe in." Keanu looked up, his eyes reflecting the sky. "It wasn't me," he said softly. "It was him," she smiled. "Maybe both of you." Music swells to peaceful resolution. Later that evening, Keanu walked alone through the quiet city streets. The sun had set and the streetlights shimmered like tiny stars, the same stars Ethan had drawn. He pulled out the old paper once more, now slightly faded but still powerful. He whispered, almost to himself, "You were right, buddy. Heroes don't always fight with fists. Sometimes they fight with kindness." And as the wind gently carried those words into the night, Keanu folded the paper carefully and placed it over his heart. Soft fade out, music slows, then silence. In a world obsessed with fame, one man chose silence. And in that silence, he proved that true heroes never stop keeping their promises. Screen fades to black, text appears, part 6, the legacy of a promise. Years passed, and with time, the story of that quiet night in the hospital began to fade from the world's memory, but not from Keanu's heart. Every year, on the same date, he would disappear from the cameras. No press, no interviews, no red carpets. He'd vanish quietly, traveling somewhere no one knew. No one, except him, because that was the day Ethan had made his final promise. And Keanu had sworn never to break it. Soft piano notes join, melancholic yet peaceful. He visited hospitals, orphanages, and care homes across cities. Sometimes he'd show up as Mr. K, bringing sketchbooks and little toy dogs. Sometimes he'd just sit by the window reading stories to kids who couldn't sleep. He never told them who he was. He didn't need to, his presence said it all. A quiet man with kind eyes who listened, really listened, when the world was too busy to care. Camera-like narration, gentle description of scenes. In one hospital, he helped a boy learn how to draw again after surgery. In another, he repaired a broken toy for a girl who said she didn't believe in heroes anymore. Everywhere he went, laughter slowly began to return, and though he never mentioned Ethan, the kids started calling him something that made him smile. The quiet hero. Music builds slightly. Emotional warmth fills scene. One evening, after visiting a hospital in Tokyo, Keanu returned to his hotel room. As he unpacked, a nurse handed him a small envelope. "It's for you," she said. "A child asked us to give it to the man who listens." Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a simple drawing, 2 figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. And beside them, written in careful handwriting, "Keep fighting always." He froze. It was the same message Ethan had written years ago, the same words drawn by another child who had never met him. He sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the paper. Tears filled his eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something that felt like destiny. Ethan's words had traveled across time. They had lived on, not through fame or media, but through the hearts of children who had felt the warmth of his quiet promise. Soft piano swells, fading into silence. Narrator, gentle, heartfelt. Sometimes, legacies aren't written in history books. They're whispered from one heart to another, until kindness itself becomes contagious. Keanu knew then, Ethan's promise wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who chose compassion over comfort, silence over attention, love over recognition, scene transition, montage imagery. A nurse leaving a small drawing of 2 figures on a hospital wall. A young doctor telling a scared patient, "You're a little warrior." A fan online writing, "Keanu Reeves visits children secretly, not for fame, but for love." The story began to spread again, quietly, beautifully, not through tabloids or headlines, but through people, through whispers, through actions. Music rises to a gentle crescendo. One day, Keanu was sitting in a park, the same park where he had once watched life pass him by after losing so much. This time, the world around him looked different. Children played. Birds sang. And for the first time in years, he smiled without the shadow of sadness. An old man sitting beside him noticed the small folded paper in his hand. He asked softly, "What's that?" Keanu unfolded it, the drawing Ethan had made, edges worn from years of being held. "It's a promise," he said quietly. The man nodded, still keeping it. Keanu looked toward the sunset, his eyes reflecting the orange glow. Always. Music pauses, quiet. Emotional stillness. He placed the drawing back in his pocket, stood up, and began walking slowly down the path, passing children laughing, parents smiling, and a little boy drawing in the dirt with a stick. The boy looked up and said, "Hey, mister, want to see my drawing?"
Keanu smiled warmly.
Of course. The boy showed him a picture, 2 figures under a night sky holding hands. He said proudly, "It's me and my hero." Keanu's throat tightened. He knelt down and said softly, "That's beautiful. Never stop drawing, okay? You never know whose heart it might reach someday." The boy grinned. "I won't." Soft wind blows. Camera pans upward toward the sky full of fading sunlight. Narrator, final monologue, slow and powerful. Maybe that's how true promises work. They don't die with time. They grow, quietly, invisibly, carried by those who still believe in something good. Keanu never told the world about Ethan. He didn't need to. Because Ethan's promise lived on. In every smile, every act of kindness, every child who learned that even the smallest heart can light the darkest night. Music swells one last time. Orchestral finish. Emotional closure. Text on screen. Dedicated to the quiet heroes who keep their promises, even when no one is watching. Fade to black. End credits roll softly with the sound of gentle rain.